Welcome to RoofTalk. This is a podcast put on by the National Roofing Contractors Association, and I am your host, Crystal Ribble. We are excited to talk about private equity today. Selling your business to a private equity firm is not just all about the money. There's a lot of questions that you have to ask, a lot of things that you need to think through. And so today we're going to talk to some experts in the field who can help us know how to make the best decisions for our companies. So first I have Nick Sabino, and he is the regional president of Roofing Corp of America. Trent Cotney, who is NRCA's legal counsel and a partner with Adams Reese. And then also we have Adam Brissman, who is CEO of Roofed Right America. Thank you for joining me today, guys.
Thanks for having us.
Good to be here.
Okay, so let's just talk about overall, why is it that roofing companies, of all things, are so attractive to private equity?
You know, the reason why private equity has kind of, sought after roofing companies here over the last 5-6 years is they're easily scalable. There are relatively low barriers to entry in most jurisdictions. And there's a lot of opportunity for upside there. So I think when private equity first got into the roofing space, there was a desire a lot of times to build larger platforms and to kind of consolidate some of the work that's been going on out there, both in the commercial and residential space. So I think that's one of the reasons why you kind of saw an increased effort by private equity to get into roofing.
Sure.
Yeah, Crystal, I'd say if you look at the success of the distributors, when I came into the industry 30 years ago, there were a lot of really small distributors, and it was a fragmented industry that really consolidated well, and there was a lot of success with that distributor consolidation. And if there's one thing about private equity, they love to copy ideas. And so they took that idea and now have applied it to roofing contractors.
Sure. Yeah. Do you see that they are interested in one type of roofing company over another? I mean, they all look so different. We do different things, correct? But are they interested in one type of roofing company over another?
There's a lot of different types of roofing companies, Crystal, and there's a lot of different types of private equity companies. So you have certain people who are just in the residential space. There are people that concentrate on some of the bigger, more complex stuff. And there are people that go after, a certain fragment of the industry that's going after service or re-roofing particularly. But each group has kind of their own set of parameters for what they go after. And there are companies, especially the early stages of this, that just put a bunch of different roofing companies in a bag, tossed it in a sack, and said, let's try to see if we can't pass this on to somebody, and somebody's going to end up with a bag full of cats. So that's going away now, fortunately. But that is certainly something that we see out there. So there's a lot of different companies, but there's a private equity company that would be interested in almost any space. But, it really depends on what there is.
Yeah. So the majority of this conversation, we're going to be talking about if you've made that decision and you want to sell to private equity, kind of what that looks like. But before we dive into that, let's talk about why would a roofing company want to sell to private equity versus going another route? Like, what would be the reason that they may choose that rather than selling it to another person or something like that?
I can take that, Crystal.
Sure.
Obviously, you have to at some point monetize your equity, and there are certain businesses. I think private equity is certainly going to pay a higher multiple than you would get from selling it to a family member or a coworker. But some people don't have a family member in the business, or that anybody that's crazy enough to run a roofing company on their own. So it's private equity is good at partnering and bringing in MBA level people to run an existing roofing company that's already there. So
I would say it's a lot like buying a car, right? If you go and let's say you want to trade in your car, right? You can go to a dealer that's well versed in it, that understands the ins and outs, that has certain parameters and guardrails kind of already set up. sort of a how you go in and do things versus trying to sell it on your own. Sometimes I think there are certain operational efficiencies with selling to private equity that may be beneficial.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And there's a few strategies too, Crystal. You might be at the end of your career and wanting to transition that company over and have no heir apparent. You may want to stay along and grow the company with added resources and see private equity funds as more of a tool. So it can be used for a few different things. We like to see it as a tool rather than a end game. So it's a source of funding. It's a source of technical knowledge, certainly not the end state. And if it's the end of your career and you're willing to just turn it over to someone, private equity may be the right answer, but you're probably not going to get the type of group, that you want. So planning ahead is really a key.
Yeah, absolutely. So a lot of people listening to this are people that have either considered this or they've done this. Someone's been talking to them about it. How do you know? And you mentioned a little bit, Adam, like you're at the end of your working life and you want to move on from this, or maybe you're not, and some of this is starting to challenge you. How do you know that you're ready to sell your company? What are some of those markers? And maybe Nick can say that. Like, what are some of the things that you come to that make you think that you're ready to do this?
I had my own. So my story is I worked at big firms for the first 15 years of my career. Then I had my own firm for 10 years. And after working on the business for 10 years, I realized that I was spending all of my time, dealing with landlords, negotiating contracts, and not doing the kind of stuff I love. Right. So I took it to market at the end of 21. And even though it's a little bit dissimilar as far as, service industry versus, a roofing contractor, I knew that it was time for me to kind of get back to doing what I love doing. And I knew at that point, when it's the right time. And that's one of the things I would encourage all our listeners to understand is that the money is very attractive, but you have to be both mentally and emotionally ready to go through that purchase. I have never looked back. I have never once said, boy, I wish I was, in charge of 45 lawyers and 100 employees. I've never once wanted to do that again. And I knew I was ready at that point. So I think, the contractors and others that are listening out there, they have to be of the same mindset. They have to recognize there's going to be changes. And some sage advice that somebody gave me is they said owners make horrible employees. I'm probably a great example of that at Adams Reese, but I think it's sage advice. You have to be prepared for what's coming next.
Yeah, my story, we sold our company to Great Range Capital in 2023 after having looked at it for 2 years. And I guess the reason for us was we wanted to partner and grow, which is, one of the other ways you could partner with private equity is see it as a bit of a tool, get some funding to go out and do some cool stuff, buy some software packages, put in some of the bigger middle market company stuff that we wouldn't have done earlier on, just being a smaller single state contractor, not single state, but a smaller contractor. So versus, I think we're operating 20 states now. And same thing with you, Nick. You're still there, so you must love it. You must love growing. It gives you tools.
Yeah, my story's really similar to Adam. Very, very similar to Adam. Stay and grow. The resources that our parent company has given us. I sold my company in 2022. I'm now the regional president, so I don't do the same day-to-day operations that I did for 30 years. Kind of to Trent's point, I don't do that. I'm in charge of the Midwest, so it's just it seemed to go a lot better. Like my company from 2022 to 2026, we've almost tripled in size in annual revenue. So that would have never been possible if I was just running the company as the president. It just wouldn't have happened. There were so many resources that were at Roofing Corp of America, and that's why we were able to grow. So that was the fun part of it, and that's why I'm still working. I got the check, but I'm still coming to work every day. And it hasn't, nothing's really changed a whole lot from that standpoint.
And you get
Sure.
to
You still
think
have
your
that
good people,
drive.
all your good people gets they have an advancement opportunity then with a bigger organization, Nick, right?
Yeah, yeah. A lot of them are working for the parent company now.
Yeah, it's a really potent tool when you have a really professional organization. It's a good tool, like what Nick said. You have a much bigger company, a much bigger group of peers to share best practices, and it's not so much of an exit as it is an onboarding to a new future with the right company. So, and there are those companies that will buy, I just want to get out and sell my assets, sell my book of business. I don't think Nick's strategy, I don't think that's definitely not our strategy either. But there are those companies out there too. There's somebody out there for everybody.
From must-have manuals to the latest releases, these are the greatest hits in roofing expertise. NRCA's technical library brings together the most trusted guides for quality roof system design, inspection, maintenance, and repair. Covering low-slope membrane systems to metal wall panels to asphalt shingle repairs and more, NRCA members can download these resources free. Add these instant classics to your roofing library at nrca.net/shop/technical and press play on smarter roofing decisions.
What are some of the red flags in this? Because I'm sure people listening, they are getting phone calls or emails about this from different companies, and maybe they don't know like who they can trust and who they can't trust. What are some of the mistakes we make in the beginning? What are some of the red flags to look for if we start to go this route?
Yeah, I can tell you one for sure is that this is such a hot space now that everyone's getting emails and phone calls from people who are not affiliated with any of the platforms or the private equity companies. What they'll do is they'll go out there and market and say, hey, I can get you, sell your company. They're not affiliated with someone, and then they'll try to go shop it to people like Nick, like me, like some of these other platforms. That's a big one. So you really shouldn't talk to anyone unless it's Roofing Corp of America, RoofTalk America, or one of the bigger private equities that's already done business in this space. Though that's the biggest red flag for me. Or you get some tiny little two guys in a truck version of private equity where they're unfunded sponsors, brand new out of college. Again, this is how we started roofing companies, right? But you may not want to hire those guys to work on your really important building as a roofing company. You certainly don't want to sell your business that you've built over years to people that will promise you, here's a deal, here's a term sheet, and then turn out not to have funding, which I will say we've seen several times. And dealing with a few, cleaning up some of the mess that left behind on a couple of our new partners that we're looking on board actually right now. So, and I'm sure, Nick, you probably see the same thing. Trent, you see the same stuff.
Yeah, Crystal, I would say, you really have to be careful because there are a lot of private equity companies out there. And, the first thing they're going to do is they're going to throw a bunch of debt on your balance sheet. They're buying you with debt. And it just creates a big problem running a roofing company with debt. It's something that is foreign to me. But, bonding capacity, how do these private equity companies get bonding capacity? If you're doing large public projects or anything like that, it's a challenge. And, the other thing is there was an article in the New York Times, I don't know, maybe 6 months ago. There's not a guarantee that these companies are successful. Private equity, Roofing Corp of America is a publicly traded company. We're out of the private equity world. We kind of got lucky that, the private equity companies buy and sell you. So when you sell your company to private equity, they're just looking to roll up to get to a certain EBITDA number and resell you. That's not the fun part of private equity. So when that occurs, fortunately for us, it was to a public company, and they said, "Hey, we don't sell companies. We only buy companies." So that was good for us because we don't have to go through that process again, and we can build for the long term, for the future. But not every private equity group is going to be successful. And again, the New York Times article about the company that I think BlackRock owned them, and they went out of business. So any rollover equity that person that sold their business to them, they probably lost it. And private equity, Adam was saying, they're young. These are 30-year-olds, Ivy League guys, and they're aggressive and they want to make a quick buck. And so that's really foreign to a lot of people that are in a family roofing company that built something over time, and then you get somebody from the private equity world in there doing their thing. So again, we got lucky, but not everybody's going to get lucky. So
Yeah.
I
That's true.
I would add on to that, and as Adam was kind of mentioning, I always joke around. Nobody calls me with good news, right? So I always hear the bad stuff that happens, and getting a non-disclosure agreement is critically important. As soon as you are approached by someone that's interested in acquiring your company, you just want to make sure that if you're disclosing anything other than very high-level, generic type information, that you've got some kind of agreement in place that's going to provide that level of oversight. So definitely recommend that. The other thing I would say is that having dealt with a lot of different private equity companies and platforms over the last few years, I can tell you there's some that are fantastic, like Nick and Adam, obviously, and others that are out there. But there are a lot that just don't understand the industry. So one of the things I would say to our listeners is it's as important that you engage in due diligence as to the buyer as they are doing to you. You want to understand, what is their plan? What is their level of debt? What does it look like for you moving into the future? What are some other examples of companies that they've acquired? Are they familiar with the space, right? I get asked a lot of times to be involved on various transactions, and I can tell you there are some private equity companies that are very skilled and influential in the space. There are others that are dabbling in it, and that's going to lead to problems long term. So definitely vet whoever's looking to buy you as much as they're vetting you.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And I think that lends to what Adam is saying, like some of these companies that are more well known and they've been doing it. Okay, so let's say we found a company, like what Nick is saying, either a public company or a private equity company that's going to buy us. What happens after that deal? What does that look like?
I'll tell you what it meant for me. I learned a whole new trade, and that was accounting. Because that was really the most important thing for us, was to close our months correctly and make sure our balance sheet was right, and do all our prepaid expenses correctly. And it was just GAAP accounting. It was once you learn something new, it's great. So, but that was really the biggest shock for me, was how much we were focused on accounting rather than roofing.
Yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely.
I can tell you, oftentimes our role a lot of times is spotting either yellow flags or red flags during the due diligence process. And typically what we do is we have a laundry list of post-closing transaction cleanup, where we, are engaged in best practices, enhancing standard operating procedures, shoring up contracts and employee and safety manuals, dealing with subs and misclassification issues, all those types of things. There's a whole litany of post-closing cleanup that usually occurs in the immediate, few months afterwards. And then after that, it's exactly like Nick said, that the key people, that are remaining after the transaction have new and different roles. I mean, there's some overlap, but oftentimes it's a little bit of a different mix. I can speak from my personal experience. I am still working with the same people day in and day out, but a lot of what I've had to do internally is changed. No longer am I, counting how much paper is is coming from the printer, but I am focused on a bigger picture and sort of different operating procedures. So there definitely is a change, most of which is for the better.
Sure. So speaking to that a little bit with your employees, their life also changing, obviously, I'm sure this can be the gamut of emotions, but how do they respond to this? And what does that look like? Do you tell them in the beginning that you're thinking about doing this? Do you not say anything until it's done? How do they respond to this? And What do you do to help address concerns?
I can tell you what I did. And when I was about to take the company to market, I had a good idea what was going on, but the people that sweat and bled with me were incredibly important. And I remember sitting them all in our we had a training center and telling them, said, look, this is what I'm thinking about doing. I want you all on board. Here's what we're kind of thinking about. Let me know what you think. And I was to the point where I was ready to make a decision, but definitely wanted to kind of clue them in as to what's going on. It's different for and I think Nick can probably speak to this. It's tough because you've got certain people that are up there with you in management that you want to make sure they know what's going on, but there's also a lot of moving parts. So, Nick, I'm sure you kind of experienced that, and Adam as well.
Yeah, with private equity too, everybody has a family member that private equity bought their company and there was layoffs, and obviously that's not what the roofing roll-ups are looking to do. We're looking to buy companies and grow with those companies. So everybody takes it differently. Our leadership team obviously knew what was happening at Deer Park Roofing, but on the day that we made the announcement, we had an employee absolutely so upset, crying, just distraught, thinking that this was really, the world was coming to an end. And as it turned out, not one person lost their job. Everybody was able to grow. Most people embraced it, but it's a 30-day transition period of, hey, this is what it is, but time heals.
Yeah.
Our leadership team we involved in pretty early in the process too. And again, it's really important that you have a leadership team who can communicate what the plan is and not say, well, I'm not sure how this is going to go. You have to be, first of all, understand how it's going to go on your end. And that goes to partnering with the right group who explains what their plan is, what they're going to do. I'm sure, Nick, you sit people down and explain the whole process. We do the same thing. And that way there's no surprises. We are going to put an ERP system in. That's going to be pretty painful, right? So we tell people all this stuff up front. That way it's not a big surprise when you have some software packages that come in that aren't the most fun to put in, right? So, but you don't want to have surprises. And a lot of groups, and I know, Nick, you guys are a great one too. A lot of groups that aren't us will kind of blindside people or themselves don't know how it should happen, and they're kind of learning along the way, which is, you don't want to be someone's science experiment.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and one thing that you mentioned, Nick, was a question that I had too, was some of these transition periods. I'm sure it's a little different because some of the due diligence and all of that, but if you're staying on with the company, or even if you're going to leave, there's a transition period from you've made this decision, they're starting to take over before you step away or you step into a new role. Is that typically 30 days? Is that about what happens, or is it sometimes longer?
I would say it's usually longer. I had a 2-year, I signed up to stay on for 2 years, basically just because I had an earnout. But there's certainly not a standard period. Some, I think Trent or Adam said it earlier. Some people will stay on or retire immediately. It's just all what your attorneys and what you work out with your employment agreement. As long as you're transparent with the company that's acquiring you, I mean, I think it's fine. I don't think that people are going to buy a company without a transition plan in place. So if you're selling your company and you plan on retiring as soon as the check hits the bank, you should probably get your ducks in a row to make sure that you can continue to run the company profitably.
Sure.
And you'd be shocked at how many people reach out to us, and I'm sure you, Nick, saying, well, I'd like to sell my company and I want to retire right away. And we say, well, who's selling all the work? Who's doing all the work? Well, I am.
Yeah.
Well, I don't know what we're supposed to do here, but you might want to have a management team that's going to continue for you.
Yeah.
So it needs to be a lot of education when it comes to that. Private equity isn't just here we'll buy your business and you step away. Really, it's typically a partnership either with the owner or with the key employees to continue it.
Yeah, totally. Trent, are there any legal things that we haven't discussed that people kind of need to be aware of when they're dealing with a private equity company? Is there anything issues that they need to kind of look at?
Absolutely. So, understanding the process while you're going through it, I think is critical. So surround yourself with good consultants, right? You've got to make sure that you've got a good tax advisor, you've got legal counsel, you've got, you may be working with a broker, you may be, you have CPA, whatever. You need to make sure that you've got professionals around you that can provide you with advice. One thing that I think catches a lot of potential sellers off guard is that at the onset, during an LOI, letter of intent, you might be offered a certain amount of money. But as you go through due diligence and you're grinding away, producing documents and everything else, ultimately that number may be whittled down, right? And one of the strategies that is often employed, sometimes we see is, death by due diligence. You take your foot off the pedal, and then as they're looking at earnings, you're not producing as much as you were, at the same time last year that could ultimately affect your bottom line. So I think having those good consultants, advisors around you, I think are critical. Especially, you got to understand that the entity that's trying to buy your business, they do it regularly, right? It's something that they do, especially if they're PE, they do it day in and day out. You probably have not sold your business much, right? It's not something that a lot of contractors do. So finding those outside consultants and then talking to, people in the industry like Adam and Nick, understanding what it looks like, what are the pain points, what's the real world, right? It's not just about a bag of cash. It's about understanding, what does this mean? How does it lock me down? What are my representations and warranties? What are, what's being withheld in escrow or otherwise that could impact my ultimate payout? All those types of things. A lot of moving parts, but definitely surround yourself with people that are in the know.
Nick and I want you to have a good lawyer. Have an M&A lawyer. Don't hire your real estate attorney who does other stuff on the side. Have a real mergers and acquisitions sophisticated law firm. Otherwise, it can be brutally painful. And I know, Nick, you've gone through it. I've gone through it. It makes no one's life easier. And sometimes our attorneys are the ones telling their attorneys, hey, I think you forgot something here. This is in your benefit. So
Yeah,
we really want you to have a good outcome. It's a market end result. Every deal is going to end up pretty darn close to what another one is. It's a market result. So no one's trying to win on these things. We want to be protected from anything that's unknown to us. You want to make sure that you get all the money that you should be due. And we all want that to be true.
Yeah. So my last question is, what does a successful private equity deal look like? In your opinion, even if it's like one word, what does that look like to you? Successfully, this happened. What does that look like?
I think for me, it's moving the existing team and professionalizing them. So taking the existing people and growing that team at the company.
That's good.
Growth professionally, personally.
I like
Basically
that.
my experience.
I'd say the same thing. It's especially for that C-suite and that management team that transitions over, making sure that you find a happy spot, right? You have to understand, and that things change, but oftentimes for the better. And being able to capitalize on that, understand that the industry itself is evolving. So being part of that, I think, is critical, and just having the right mindset going into it.
Absolutely. Well, this is great. You've given us so much information, and I hope that everyone that's listening, they got some more information about private equity or decisions that they might need to make for their company. This has been an episode of Roof Talk, and I am your host, Crystal Ribble. This is a production of the National Roofing Contractors Association, and it's produced by Told You So Media. Thank you guys for joining me today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You.
This podcast is produced by Told You So Media.
Told you so!